Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Cobb, Executive Director of the Podcast Academy. I'm so pleased to be here with Rob Greenlee, who is VP of Content and Partnerships at Libsyn. He's the co-host of the newmediashow.com. He's a board member and was actually the very first chair of the Podcast Academy. And he's been doing a lot of hard work on the AMBs. So a lot to come with that. As you guys come in, if you have questions, I would ask that you please put them in the Q&A box as opposed to the chat box. The chat box often zooms by, so the Q&A box will help us take notice of those. Rob's going to do a little bit of a presentation, and then we will have questions at the end. So thanks for coming, and I'm going to turn things over to Rob Greenlee. Take it away.
Well, thank you, Michelle. I know it's been a passion of a love trying to work on the Academy and the Ambies and trying to bring them to the finish line coming up here in May. And I think everybody's very excited about the awards ceremony and what we're going to put together. I think and then all the branding has been fantastic for the Academy as well. So I'm really proud of you and the team over there at the Podcast Academy and what they've been able to do and putting some polish on the Academy and making it look professional and I think a representation of what we want in the podcasting medium. So, but why I'm here is to talk about the state of podcasting in 2021, and this is really the purpose of what I'm doing here is really kind of trying to do a deep dive into the metrics of what is going on in podcasting, and to give you kind of a snapshot, a little bit, deep into the book about what's actually happening around how big the market is, where it's moving, where's the activities that are going on in the medium. And Michelle's right. I'm a VP of Content and Partnerships for Libsyn, the first and largest paid podcast hosting platform that's been around. It started in 2004. And also I've been a podcaster myself all these years. I started back in 1999 doing a radio show, took it out as a podcast in 2004. I've been doing podcasting for various companies ever since. So, and continue to do that today. Now it's spending all my time in Clubhouse. So, but anyway, I'm going to jump ahead and go to the first slide. And this will just kind of give you a snapshot of where the total global podcast content market is right now and how much content's out there. All-time show feeds created. Now, this is the amount of shows that are currently in the Apple Podcast platform more specifically, and that's kind of viewed as the largest repository of podcast content today, and at just under 2 million show feeds that exist out there right now. That's not to say all those are active shows that are being actively updated, and you'll see the number below, about 1.2 million are active. That means that there's been a fresh episode published in the last 3 months. So, and then we're seeing a brisk pace of new shows being added to the podcast market, more specifically being added to the Apple Podcast directory of a little over 100,000 new shows every month. And that number has actually been growing because I think through the pandemic era, in the March, April, May, June, July timeframe, I believe we were in the 80 to 85,000. So what we've seen is there was a little bit of a pullback around the holidays here in the US. But then it has proceeded to charge forward and break new ground. So we're continuing to grow fast in the podcasting space. I don't think there's too many podcasts yet. I think that there's some debate out there about whether or not that's the case. There's about 47 plus million episodes as of March 2021 that have been published into the Apple Podcast directory. At least that's the data that I've been able to source from a fairly reliable source out there. And then the other two numbers are a little more dated, from January of this year, about 383,000 active shows in the last 90 days with at least 10 episodes. So that tells you those are podcasts been around typically for at least 2 to 3 months if they're a weekly publishing show. And that kind of gives you how quickly the numbers whittle down to a more, I guess, a much smaller number of active shows and ones that have been around a while. And then about 105,000 have published and have one episode as of January. So that kind of gives you kind of a snapshot of what's going on there. So let's go ahead and get to the next slide here. And this is a ranking chart of where we are with Libsyn podcasts being heard. So as you think about the listening platforms that exist out there today, and these are typically applications that people run on their mobile devices, or they pull up in their browser on their computers, and they consume, and to some degree in other types of devices as well. We're starting to see smart speakers, and we're starting to see those smart speaker technologies being integrated into eyeglasses and watches and these wearable type devices. So some of these platforms are available on those devices as well. But as you can see, at least on the Libsyn hosted podcast, which many of the podcasts that Libsyn hosts have been around for a fairly long period of time. It's a platform that gets new podcast publishers, but it has a large pool of long-standing, long-running podcasts that have been publishing for multiple years. And so you too tend to see a fairly high 59.2% distribution percentage into the Apple podcast ecosystem, just because that's the one that everybody thinks about first. Spotify has been growing, so you can see that little green arrow pointed up at about 13.2. That's up from just a few months ago when they were at about 9%. So that one has been growing. The Google Podcasts area is definitely picking up steam at 2.2. It's still small, but as you think about Android, I think it's an important growth component here that Google was in the sub 1% just last year. So you can see where it's been picking up steam. And I think as we think about it, that probably makes some sense. And the Overcast app on iOS, which is also on the same platform that Apple's on, is just a little under 2%. As you can see, it falls off very quickly in the percentages of downloads that are going into these listening platforms. You look at Stitcher, which is now owned by the Sirius XM folks, like 1.64%, and then Podcast Addict, which is also on Android, is 1.24, and then Castbox, which I believe is on all the platforms. But as you can see, it falls off pretty fast. But it's good to see this distribution. And on the far right, you can see a lot of the other apps that are handling podcasts and the fractions. And I just want to emphasize, this is only downloads that are happening through the Libsyn platform. So this isn't necessarily a representative of every platform out there. I think if you were to look at other podcast hosting platforms, you'd probably see a slightly different percentage numbers distribution based on the composition of the content that exists on those hosting platforms. So let's go ahead and jump ahead. And this is a piece of data that can be a little intimidating to some podcasters as they look at this, but about 80% of the downloads are in the up to 3,000 per episode range. And this is as of January. So as you can see, shows that are, 5,000 and then up into the higher numbers, you can see the percentages of shows that are in that range falls off fairly fast. The adjusted mean average of downloads per episode across our whole network is just a hair under 1,300 downloads per episode. So just to kind of give you a snapshot of what the distribution of downloads that happens. So don't feel too bad if your show hasn't grown as big as you would like. Get up into those higher numbers. You're in good company out there, and I don't believe that you need to have huge numbers with your show to make your show a success. and accomplish the goals that you have for your podcasts. It may be all about who's listening, not how many. So just keep that in mind. And let's jump ahead. I wanted to share some data that we captured off of Libsyn around average episode duration. There's a lot of information flying around out there about what the ideal length of a podcast is. And I think it depends on how you look at it. And there really is no rule here. It's just more of what we see in the data, right? And you can take that, you can leave it, you can translate that into what you're doing with your podcast. But at the end of the day, you need to make the podcast that you want to make, that fits with your strategy and the amount of content that you want to share with your community that you're trying to build. And that can vary a lot. So the average length as of the most recent data that we have is about 65 minutes. The median is about 60 minutes, and there's not a huge difference there. And you can see over a period of time, just in the last in the February timeframe, you can see it's varied a little bit, about 5 minutes or so on that. Well, no, that's over multiple years. Sorry. Back in 2020, it was actually a little shorter, and in 2019, it was even shorter then. But you're still in that 55 to 60-minute range is the median. And if you look down below, you can kind of see that shows that are 22 minutes or less. And that's the shorter length show, at least on the Libsyn platform, has slightly declined. It went from 8.5% in 2020 to 8%. I wouldn't say that's a huge drop. And then shows that are 40 minutes or more have fallen a little bit too, just like a point and a half. So, and then shows that are 120 minutes or more, you can see a bigger drop off. So I do think that it's accurate to say that longer form shows, ones that are 2 hours or more, there are much fewer of those today than. So I think that the sweet spot is somewhere, as you can see in the numbers here, it's in the 1 hour range or so. Probably in the 30 to 1 hour range is probably the sweet spot. And if you think about the average commute time in normal times, it's usually about 26, 28 minutes each way. So you can kind of see how that factors into maybe a 45 to 1 hour podcast. So anyway, I think those numbers really kind of make sense in the scheme of things of what we see in the shows that are most popular. So let's go ahead and jump to the next one. And so what we're seeing also here, just to kind of build off of this, is a huge and growing global distribution for podcasts. So, and I wanted to run through a list of kind of key things that have happened and that are happening in the market for listening to podcasts. So number one at the top is Spotify with 200 plus million active users. Google Podcasts, the Google platform itself, multiple billions of people. Pandora, Sirius XM is into the podcast market now, trying to develop and grow and acquire their way to much larger audiences and a powerful podcasting platform with over 66 million users. The Amazon Music this past year with Audible has been added to the medium with about 55 plus million. And you think about the scale and scope of just the Amazon.com platform, and you can kind of see how that is a significant entry into the podcasting medium. And then Ghana, out of the country of India, 200 plus million streaming music users over there now have access to podcasts. So, and many of the hosting platforms are actively submitting shows over to the Ghana platform. The same with the JioSaavn music platform, which is growing in its importance in the podcasting space as well, with 150 plus million out of India, but that is kind of a global platform as well. So you can actually get access to that platform really for most countries around the world right now as well. So you can kind of see some of these tend to be focused on particular countries, but some of them are global, but most of their users are in a specific country. And there are new global platforms coming that have yet to be announced. So we're not done with this yet. There's certainly a lot of other big potential podcast listening platforms that are in the works as I speak right now. So don't be surprised over the next couple months that we see some more big entries into this medium. And like I said, more global expansion is on the way. So, and then we're also seeing the development of the social audio platforms, the Clubhouse, the Twitter Spaces. We're still exploring what the implications of that is around listening as well as creation. If there's going to be an impact on podcasting, on the content creation side, and what the impact is on the listening side. We shall see on that. And then I believe that the next thing, once we've saturated the global music streaming listening side of things and other large platforms, that what we'll see is the development of more vertical topic listening platforms. That'll be genre specific platforms that will focus on a particular topic area or genre, and really drill in on that and promote it and feature it and drive audience to that vertical interest group. So let's go ahead and jump ahead. Podcasting is flaming up. We're starting to see in the data growing search discovery as Google enters the fray. We're seeing opportunities to get discovered more and more in search. And I believe transcription and AI and machine learning is going to transition us into other forms of discovery as well in the future. So a lot of that has yet to be, I believe, rolled out and deployed yet, but I think we will see better methodologies of finding and listening to podcasts. The growth of web browser-based audio players is something that Apple and Google have been pushing pretty aggressively out there to drive audience to podcasting through their browsers. So that will continue to expand, I assume. And like I mentioned before, large international listening platforms are still on the docket coming. I believe that the wireless AirPods and other wireless mobile earphone type devices, even now we're seeing smart watches, the smart speaker appliances, eyeglasses, which is now something that the Amazon folks are offering, that has the smart speaker platforms built into the glasses that will play right into your ears. And then also, I believe in cars. So the smart speaker platforms, I believe the key to those platforms growing is to have them be more personal listening experiences rather than group listening experiences, though we're starting to see some data in certain genres of podcasting that is showing growth in the group listening type of scenarios around podcasting, where families get together and or more than one person listening together to a podcast. It also looks like the free label subscription is going away, and Follow is following right up on that, and really kind of leading the charge as we look into the future. And I believe one of the big reasons for that is a shift over to true paid subscription models coming to podcasting on a lot of these listening platforms. And then also with the podcast index project, working on new RSS tags coming, I think we're going to see other capabilities. It's a little slow in developing here, but there are some RSS tag opportunities that can benefit podcasters and listeners that are coming through the pipeline right now. So we shall see how that works out. Wanted to also share kind of some demographics about podcast listening, as well as the age and the diversity of the medium. Also, podcast listening is growing younger and older, would be what I would say here. The monthly online audio growth is pretty much flat, and that's like online radio. So over the last 3 years, it's actually it's gone down 1%. Monthly audio podcasts, though, has been growing the last 3 years. Over the last 3 years, it's grown 9%. So you can kind of see there's a shift in audio consumption going from linear, which tends to be the online audio side, over to the on-demand side, which tends to be podcasts. It tends to be like click play experiences, but yet it's on demand. So it's not a live type of experience, is where podcast is kind of in its sweet spot over the last 3 years. Monthly podcast listening by gender in the US population has been growing steadily on both sides of men and women. So you can see in the numbers here, men as growth in the last 2 years has grown about 4%. About 3% more women have grown from 2020 to 2021. So those are good, solid numbers going forward. And monthly podcast listening by age. So you can see we're growing at the ends of the age spectrum, the 12 to 34 age group over the last 2 years has grown 7%. So younger people are definitely connecting with podcasts at a much deeper level. The middle tier, 35 to 54, I believe is aging out right now as the baby boomers move through. So that actually had a decline over the last 2 years. And the 55 plus folks have stepped up to the plate, growing 4%. So those folks, I believe, are coming out of the older end of the prior age category, I think. So that's where that's coming from. And on the ethnicity side of monthly podcast listeners, we're seeing a decline in white and black listening bases, and growth in the Hispanic and Asian and other communities. I'm not sure what the other encapsulates. I couldn't get that data, but you can kind of see a little bit of an adjustment there going on, and it's very, very interesting as well. So let me jump ahead. I know that was a lot of data. You're welcome to get this deck from me if you want to send me an email, robg@libsyn.com. I'd be more happy to share it with you. Many of you may have seen this, but overall podcast listening on the Infinite Dial was released last week, and it shows US total 12 plus ever listened to a podcast of the US population, about half the population, 57%. That's been steadily growing. Actually didn't grow quite as fast as the 2019 to 2020 timeframe or the 2018 to 2019. So we're slowing down on the rapid speed of the growth on the listening side on the U.S. population, but I think that's somewhat anticipated as you look to any kind of a market growth metric. So monthly podcast listening, this of the U.S. population 12 plus. This is monthly. People are getting in there. That grew about 4%. So that is it's about the same as what grew between 2019 and 2020. So people are still staying engaged with podcasts and doing quite well with this. So we keep moving up. As long as that bar keeps getting larger on the other end there, we're in good shape. And as you can see, it's been pretty steady over the span of the years. There's been a few little dips, but not too many. Weekly podcast listening. These are your avid, rabid podcast fans getting in there and listening to your episodes. That grew 4%, up to about 80 million of the U.S. total population in the last week, the week that they did the survey. So those are good numbers too. This is kind of a last kind of a couple slides here. The number of podcasts listened to in the last week. So this is kind of two things here. So you have 8 podcasts listened to in the last week across 5.1 podcast shows in the last week. So you can see that we're just a hair under 2 episodes per show that is listened to per week. So that's an interesting kind of breakout. These numbers are fairly consistent. I think over the last 10 years or so, this number used to be in the 5 to 7 range. So I think we are accelerating in the number of podcasts that people are listening to, number of episodes. So there is a more of a frequency of getting new episodes and listening to them on a weekly basis. And the total number of shows that are being listened to, and now those are shows that are in your library on your device, I believe that has actually maybe gone down. I believe it was in the 6 range many years ago. So I do believe people are kind of winnowing down their libraries a little bit, getting it to just the shows that they want. I do believe people cycle through shows quite a bit on their devices as they hear people sharing it with them, saying you should go check this podcast out, and people will check it out. They may like it. They may remove a podcast that they don't like and they add a new one. So I think there's a constant churn going on with podcasts here. So let's go ahead and that's the end. So Michelle, we can jump into a Q&A if you want to at this point.
Absolutely. We have some questions in the Q&A box. Okay.
Great.
So the first one is actually more TPA than podcast in general.
Okay.
How can we ensure that independents don't get overlooked in something like the AMBs?
Well, I think the Academy went to quite a bit of effort to try and make the process as fair as possible, and accessible as possible. I think we can probably always do better at that. And I think after this year, I think we will review that and see how we did, and then try and iterate and improve on that process if it appears to be not what I think what we all would have liked. So I don't know, Michelle, if you have any thoughts on that.
I would say, of course, one of the things is you have to submit. So I would
Right.
say we got,
Just that.
you know, we did seem to get less submissions from independent podcasters.
Mhm.
We do have a large portion of our members being independent podcasters.
Right.
So those people are part of the initial Blue Ribbon panel if they want to be. So becoming a member, being part of the Blue Ribbon panel and giving a listen and your vote. And then ultimately all of the members get to vote amongst the nominees, the final 7. So, participating in that process always helps, but do submit. That's the first bit of advice I would have for anyone. We do have a number of independent finalists that we're pretty excited, and we've got a show called Dem Times that in fact got 2 nominations, which is a completely independent podcast. So
Yeah, that's awesome.
just keep doing good work and submitting and participating in the process. All of that helps.
Yeah, I think that's the key, is actually making sure that you get submitted.
That's step 1.
Yeah, right.
All right, our next question. This one from a listener says that Libsyn publishes the company's podcast. And speaking of metrics, when I look at show stats, are the number of plays tracked, or is our listenership relegated to only unique downloads?
Well, plays is a difficult stat to track, and I know a lot of people would love to have that terminology. I know a lot of advertisers would love to have that terminology because it implies a certitude of play.
Right.
And that's unfortunately, we cannot really offer a guarantee of play in podcasting because it is not a streaming delivery method. It is a download method. So we can only track what the technology allows us to track, and that's what the IAB certification process that all the hosting platforms went through, was to all come to an fairly standardized agreed way to count downloads, because the downloads can come in on a variable basis based on how fast your internet connection is. So we can't always, especially if you download before you listen, we don't actually have a way to know if you actually listen to it. I think in the click play scenarios, and what we're moving to more and more is when people are just clicking the play button, that does create more of a streaming-like experience for the listener. And it is similar, but it's still doing batch downloading in the background, which means that you could get more audio downloaded to your device than you actually listen to. So it'll pre-download the episode if you make a request. Now, I would say that more and more of the listening platforms are trying to optimize that. I know Apple, if you don't play the episodes that are downloaded, whether it be automatically or manually, that it stops automatically downloading. So we're trying to preserve the integrity of the data that we're sending back to the advertisers, and trying to get as close as we can to actual listener play activity. So, which is what we all want.
Yes, the golden metrics, right?
Right, right, right. It's just not there. It's just not there yet because a lot of the listening platforms like Apple and Spotify, they don't report it to the hosting platforms. You can log into their area, like the Apple Podcast Connect area, and Spotify has their podcast partner area, to look at data off of their platform, but they may not be tracking the data exactly like what Libsyn is doing either. They may be just doing what's called click play data, which is the person clicks the button, that counts as a play, right? Regardless of whether or not they listen to it all the way or not. So that's we're still a little bit trying to work this out between all the platforms and trying to figure out a way to do this that actually protects listener privacy as well. And that's one of the key things that keeps us apart.
Oh, that's good to know. Interesting. All right. So, what are the most popular genres of podcasts?
Well, I think what you might think, I mean, if you go look at the Apple Podcast catalog and you look at the top 200 podcasts, I think you can get an idea. I think it's culture. I believe it's news related. There's a lot of shows in there that have talk personalities. I think culture is pretty big. I think like I said, news, sports is can be a large driver of podcast downloads. But what we've seen over the last couple of years is the growth of true crime, and a lot of the reality-based storytelling podcasts have been doing quite well. But the more traditional talk type programs are still popular, and they still build their audiences. It's all a matter of and that can be in all sorts of different genres. If those shows are done well, they can build strong communities that have tight connections with listeners. So, yeah, so I hope that was helpful.
And are there any hot topics that seem to be getting interest at the moment? I mean, you mentioned true crime, which is one of my favorites, of course.
Yeah, well, podcasting does tend to follow cultural and societal trends. So when we saw the explosion of COVID a few months back, we saw an explosion of COVID podcasts. So,
True.
and then when we see a controversy in politics or an election, you see a spike in those type of shows too. So you see a strong parallel between what happens in the real world and what happens in the virtual podcasting world too. So, but there are mainstays. What most of them are like we had mentioned prior here: culture, society, news, sports. All of the ones that you would think, and that does vary quite a bit from country to country. So what's popular here in the U.S. may not be popular in Asia, or quite as much in other countries around the world. So I can't really make blanket statements about what's popular on a global scale, and this is a global medium.
Great. So, what monetization features does Libsyn offer on their platform to include ad placements and dynamic ad insertion?
Well, we have supported podcast advertising since the very early days of the company. That all the way back in like 2005 or so, we started selling advertising for some of the shows that are hosted on our platform. But that has been a relatively small program that the company has. We do have all those dynamic ad insertion tools that's been part of our Libsyn Pro platform for boy, for probably 12 or 13, 14 years, something like that. So I think we were one of the first podcast hosting platform to ever have dynamic ad insertion with podcasting. So it's just a matter of we haven't turned it on to every podcaster because it's been a fairly advanced tool, and most podcasters haven't wanted it anyway. So it's just a matter of keeping those tools for the larger shows that have the scale to make it economically viable. That's not to say that we won't be doing more things with dynamic ad insertion on the Libsyn platform. As you look to the future, we do think that there's a new era emerging, utilizing that technology. And so you're going to see some things come that can even take dynamic ad insertion even beyond advertising, I believe. So, and that's being played around with a little bit too right now at some other companies as well these days.
Well, we'll look forward to hearing more about that.
Yes.
How would you describe the state of diversity in podcasting? Everything from minority-owned publishing companies to hosting platforms. Are investment dollars supporting these companies?
Yeah, I think we've made a lot of progress in the medium over the years around gender and ethnic and racial diversity. I think there's a lot more inclusion than in the early days of the medium, and that wasn't because I don't feel like anybody was kept out. It was more just the interest wasn't there, and I think it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg kind of a situation. The content that appeals to particular demographic groups has to be there as well for a medium to be attractive for people to get involved and to feel inclusion in that. And I believe we've reached that point now, and I think our society and our culture is definitely emphasizing that as something that we all want more in our world. And I believe podcasting is a reflection of that growth and development of what's happening in society and the expectations and the rightful desire for more inclusion and to have content that actually caters to that communities, whatever community it is. And I've always been very, very welcome to having a diverse content catalog as well as a diverse content creator community. So I'm very supportive of that.
And do you see an opening in the business for a global podcasting platform for a topical vertical catering to minority and underserved communities globally?
Yeah, I think we are starting to see some of that happen right now. It's happening kind of focused, and the academy is doing some things with it. It's the state of women, and that tends to work with women of color from all over the globe, and there are platforms that are already starting to come up that are focused on a vertical group of podcasters and listeners that are looking for that type of content. So I definitely think that it's a growing thing, and I think we're going to see more of it as we look to the future.
Absolutely. Well, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. I will tell you we've got a lot of upcoming events from the Podcast Academy, not on the schedule yet, but soon to be added will be a session about using Twitter for podcasts. So that'll be coming on April 6th, just figuring out the details with our experts from Twitter who will be talking to us about how to use Twitter to grow our audience and other things. We've got the team from On Being talking to us about the bringing together of art and audio, as it were, on April 16th. And there'll be some other activities coming up on the website and in the newsletter, so look for those. Plus, voting for the Ambies starts on March 29th. So I hope that you put aside some listening time. In each category, you'll have to listen to all 7 episodes and vote on them. So make sure that you are being prepared to walk or drive or sit around your house and do a lot of listening so you can participate as well.
Yeah, no, I'm excited for it coming up here. I'm actually excited for spring and summer. We can hopefully get out of this pandemic situation and get back to normal and get back to podcasting conferences, which there seems to be bubbling up in interest in podcast movement and other events coming up here in the late summer. And hopefully the academy will be there, and we can offer some meetups and things like that at those venues at that time as well. So I'm definitely excited. I think I blew through this thing pretty fast. What do you think?
You did. I think you know your stuff. So
But
Anyone
if
who
you,
would, yeah, I'll send a
yeah,
copy of your deck to anyone who is registered if you send that to me.
yep,
And if anyone has any other questions, Rob's email was throughout this, and we have recorded this, so feel free to send your friends to come and take a look. It'll be up on the site next week. Thanks for coming.
terrific. Well, thank you, Michelle, and thank you to all the Podcast Academy members. Thank you for being with us and joining the organization. And we definitely are excited to have you back with us next year too.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Take care.
Okay. Thank you.